Randy Lennox, President and CEO, Universal Music in Canada. Well, as a company, we are a company of about 350 people strong. We also have a number of part-time interns and street teams. For example, we have a urban street team handling that genre of music in every city in Canada. We have a rock street team that handles the rock genre of music in every city in Canada. We actually have work out of 13 offices across the country. One would think sometimes that, okay, what is the structure of your company? It's Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver centric, for example, and that is true. Those three cities have very large staff for Universal. That said, though, we are in another 10 or so cities where we have representatives, and this is to accommodate things like our touring artists, local radio and retail in those marketplaces. So we actually operate in, I believe, 13 cities in Canada, head office being here in Toronto, Ontario. Well, we're fortunate that Canada is an autonomous country. You know, sovereignty exists, and it's of great homage and respect to my bosses, Doug Morris and Zach Horowitz, that they understand that the cultural difference in Canada means that sometimes we're going to perform very well on US-based repertoire. And other times, because Canadians want to grow up and be British, that we actually disproportionately perform on European and very much British repertoire. So for example, if you wanted to frame Canada as an industry, Canada is approximately 8% of the size of the US industry as a country. Universal Music Canada is slightly larger, and I'll explain that in a few moments, of that proportional share. But for every 100 records that scan in the United States, about 8 scan in Canada, to put it in perspective. But we have an interesting cultural difference in the sense that, for example, Toronto is the most multicultural city on earth. Montreal, Quebec, they all want to grow up and be Parisian. We all want to grow up and be British, and some of us American also. So the incoming disparate nature of the musical cultures is a wonderful melting pot in Canada. The fact that our French language population is 20% of Canada's population, therefore a vibrant community in that market in isolation. That's just an isolated, very anomalous marketplace in Quebec. The fact that Vancouver and Toronto have a lot of British population, again, a band like Snow Patrol and Keane do very, very proportionally well in Canada because of our wanting to sort of have that British cultural influence, because we are a British colony after all. The fact that we're at the 49th parallel and we're the little brother to the United States is also very influential. Interesting, though, that our proportion of country music in Canada, being the brother to the north, and urban music in Canada is not at that 8% level that I mentioned in terms of the overall aggregate market in this country. One of the inhibitors to that is that country music is very much a Western Canadian phenomenon, sort of our equivalent to the Texas and Arkansas type of states, whereas in Toronto and certainly in Quebec, country music really is not popular. In the case of urban music, given our population in Canada is so multicultural, we don't quite have an urban music base proportional to the United States either. So those are a couple of nuances. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, that sort of hodgepodge of French culture coming in, English culture coming in, some of the more mainstream urban in Canada sells very, very well. If you were to classify Black Eyed Peas as urban, then we actually perform at 18% of the U.S. on that band in an 8% market. So there are exceptions where artists come and visit our country and do mainstream touring and work hard. We can actually enjoy up to between 10 and 18% of the U.S. sales on particular projects. There's no rhyme nor reason to this, however. It's just the way Canada sometimes embraces. Another great example, which is not an urban one, is Jack Johnson. Here's a surfer guy who you would associate with a California vibe. Well, in Canada, we do almost 22% of what the U.S. sells, with a guy who's really a really American guy. But we've fallen in love in this country with Jack Johnson, like the Black Eyed Peas. So proportionally, Canada is very embracive. We do embrace certain artists, and I'd like to say that those artists that we embrace are all in one genre. The great news is they are not. They're all over the map. The Canadian music industry is made up somewhere in the 16 to 18% range of our owned local repertoire. At why we exist and why we're not just a branch distribution office of Universal United States. In our case, we're higher than that number because we've made a concerted effort as Universal Music Canada to embrace two things. One is artists directly in terms of disproportionately high signings in Canada, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the second is we have, as Universal, embraced early and consistently the independent sector to do what we call distribution deals or enhanced distribution deals which offer services from Universal Canada such as promotion, marketing, press, etc. to help our little brothers, if you will, the independent sector along. We've gone so far as to actually invest in 4 very significant independent labels in Canada where Universal Canada has a minority but a strong ownership position in those companies. And it's been wonderful, given the size of our country, that we can actually be an owner of an indie as a multinational major, and the community tends to respect that because we're embracing authentically the independent sector and not trying to dominate it. We're trying to nurture it as a philosophy and as a strategy rather than sort of universalize it, if you will. So we are, in fact, leaving lots of oxygen in the room with respect to nurturing our independence, some in an ownership position, some just in a straight distribution position. But having said that, it's one of the reasons our market share is nearing 40% here in Canada. We're running at, like last week, for example, we were 40%. And year to date, we're approximately 37.5%. So our embracing of the independent sector is certainly a contributor to that. But we don't live and die by that sword. I mean, the reason we do the independent involvement as Universal Canada is very clear. We love music. And we don't have the disposition personally to think that we can find it all first, that we can find it all the most effectively. We don't suffer from that delusion of thinking we can, we're the first stop. We recognize that the independent sector has some of my favorite bands. And to be able to help them along, it's not about pride of ownership, because there is ownership in helping independents and independent bands. A great label we have called Last Gang, a local label, has a band called Metric that I've fallen in love with. As far as I'm concerned, when I get up in the morning, Metric may as well be on Universal, because we conduct ourselves as a company, and because we're sort of enjoined to that band and that label, we just conduct ourselves like they're with us. And it's evident, we're 2 gold records on our way to platinum, and there's great success. And of course, the independent label, the band themselves, are the main contributors to that success. But it's very parenting, it's very rewarding for us to be able to be a parent to that process, whether it's a direct signed artist, a direct licensed artist, or an artist through the independent sector. So it's a big part of Universal Music Canada's thought process and a big part of our culture and a big part of our pride. In every way, we treat preferentially our local artists. It's why we're sovereign. It's why a Canadian record company exists, to nurture and develop I'm Canadian, and all of the executives in our company are Canadian. And our whole company, staff-wise, is. And so there's a certain sense of pride and accomplishment and nurturing that goes with finding an artist in any country. But certainly when you live in a country as finite as Canada with 31 million people, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to develop when you only have a 31 million person audience, the size of California. It can be a very finite experience. So there's 2 things we do. We give disproportional love, but you can appreciate financially. We understand the finite nature of the marketplace of Canada. And I think, we spend disproportionately as well financially to help and nurture and break Canadian artists. Not that we don't prioritize international artists, because we also very much do. But we have the advantage in international artists to having incoming media and marketing from our big brother to the south. So we know who the heck, Black Eyed Peas is when they come. There's already an aura around that band, as opposed to no one that no one's ever heard of, which, as you know, takes more time, energy, and money, especially at the inception and beginning of an artist's career. So it's very much the word I mentioned earlier, the artist process and our preferential treatment of same is very much the parent in me. It's very much the parent in our company, and it's very much the true joy that we receive in coming to work every day. And if you don't have that, then this is not the place to be, because that's what this is about. When you talk about Canadian artists, I mentioned earlier that the artists internationally we perform are the ones that pay most attention to us. So there's a certain Canadian behavior that wants our own to win, whether it's hockey, whether it's Olympics, whether it's music. There's absolutely a patriotism here, because we know, given our population base, that we're the underdog. So there's absolutely, we sing from the rooftops that our artists that are Canadian are in fact Canadian. And we wear flags in our lapels, so to speak, when we travel internationally, which is part of the answer, because one of the things that we do at Universal Music Canada strategically to help our Canadian artists is by being honest with them and recognizing there's only 31 million people to be your audience. We work very diligently and very hard to partner with universal companies around the world to make sure that there is love in the room in other territories for Canadian artists, because really we are ambassadors to our own music in Canada is the way I look at it. So, for example, I'll take Molly Johnson, who's an adult artist, sort of a Nora Jones vibe. We went to France in February and showcased her for Universal Music France, and we are signing Molly Johnson, jointly with Universal Music France and Universal Music Canada. Why? There's 68 million people in France. Now our audience is 100 million. It's 68 and 31. So now we have a wonderful artist. We have both financial and emotional participation from Universal Music France. We've got 100 million people to talk to. Beats 30. A band from Montreal called Mobile. We fell in love with this band. We just put it in the top 10 in Canada, and we called Martin Kerzenbaum and Jimmy Iovine from Interscope, and they came to Toronto, saw this band, loved it, loved the band, and then we did a joint signing between Universal Music Canada and Interscope LA. So now, when we're in Interscope Los Angeles talking about this artist Mobile, this band Mobile, there's not only a recognition, it's not just Randy from Canada talking about the artist, there's also a sense of emotional and financial ownership for that artist. So Interscope, being a very powerful company within Universal Music Group worldwide, is a powerful broker for us to broker the band Mobile, not only in the United States, but in the rest of the world. Is there a Canadian music sound? Well, I could start with, when I name our top artists that are known worldwide, Sarah McLachlan, Shania Twain, Diana Krall, Nickelback, Avril Lavigne, off the top, there's absolutely nothing musically that they have in common with one another. So I think there is no particular Canuck sound in the same way that we put hockey players out into the world. However, there are a number of, within the Canadian sound, there is a number of regional nuance. For example, Canada's East Coast very, very clearly is a wonderfully vibrant folk, Celtic, very Irish vibe, a little bit of bluegrass. The whole vibe out there is not country music per se, but it's hybrid country, if you will, and Celtic. As you come west, the next stop, of course, is Quebec. Quebec is probably in the 80% range French language music. So its transportability is fairly finite across Canada also. You have to really go from Quebec to France to really further champion French language music. But there's a second culture, and we've now only been, a tenth of the way across the country. Toronto is certainly, as you come into Ontario, which Toronto is located in, you're dealing right there with much hipper. Toronto is the New York of Canada, and I say that with respect to anyone watching from any of the other cities. It's a well-known fact. And you have a broken social scene, and all the sort of very cool downtown Queen and King Street and College Street, which are our main hip streets here. There's a lot of bands, whether they're from Toronto or not, they certainly come to Toronto as their conduit. Instead of New York and LA, it's just Toronto for us in that sense. So the cooler, the alternative, all that scene, much hipper here. Probably a little less country, probably a lot more rock, but mostly alternative as well. And then as you go sort of on your way west to the prairies, to Winnipeg and Calgary and Edmonton, you're back into rock, very much rockland, very much country land again, more in your Texas level. Now you're into that whole vibe. A lot of rock, a lot of country, not that much urban. And then you're coming through the mountains to Vancouver, and now you're back into an international city where you have urban and you have country and you have rock and you have all the melting pot of music that Toronto has. Vancouver, additionally, given its proximity to both Seattle and LA up the coast, is also a great starting point on a gateway to the world, if you will. So Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, all three of them in their own way, are all equally legitimate gateways. And that's for those of you watching from Vancouver and Montreal too. So those three are really the conduits. And as you know, Montreal has a major Seattle kind of buzz around it right now with Arcade Fire and all the various bands that are coming from that territory. Toronto has that from time to time, Vancouver, etc. When we look to sign a band in Canada, there are really no restrictions to where we would look, and we're fortunate that we do have 13 offices, so some of the smaller communities, we do have eyes and ears there on the ground, which is very, very helpful, because certainly a major city doesn't have any kind of divine right to talent. A major city just has a huge population, but many of the artists that we have and have signed and are very successful are from nowhere near our three major cities. So we're cognizant of the fact that many artists do come to the bigger cities because they're from smaller communities and they want to be exposed, so therefore they're playing in Toronto and Montreal, etc. So we're aware that that's one of the avenues to signing artists, but we don't find that, we're not restricted to that. Right now we just went to Victoria Island, which is on the other side of Vancouver, a very beautiful small island in Canada, and signed an artist called Haley Sales, who's a beautiful, beautiful 18-year-old singer-songwriter that lives on a blueberry farm in Victoria. And our A&R director has been to that blueberry farm not less than 4 or 5 times already. So because they're recording right there, we're going to her. We discovered her through some associates out west, etc. So, the blinders are not on. It's very important to us that we go where the talent and where the gift is. The best way to bring an artist to our attention, and I think to any label's attention, is playing live. Playing live in communities where we're actively out in, because as you know, we all know the band you fall in love with or the artist you fall in love with. Generally, you fall in love with that artist live. That's the conduit to getting our attention. We have artists that we're interested in play for us here in the building all the time, because it's so important that we can feel their aura live, feel their persona, and feel their whole vibe as a human being as well as a performer, because by seeing them live you get a chance to sit and look in their eyes and see who they are, because that's also very important part of the process of signing artists, to have a relationship and to know that that person is a decent person and compatible and has the vision that's consistent with the vision that you have for them, for example. So we're here to serve their vision. In terms of artists that just send in tapes cold calling, probably not in this lifetime. It's not really, we receive well over 150 a week to this day, and I don't know how it's practical for anyone watching that's an artist. I don't know how it's practical for us to go through those, because they're just, yes, some packages are sexier than others, so you might be attracted, or some individuals might be more attractive than others, but it's just, it's more compelling live. Myspace is absolutely becoming a wonderful conduit. Anything on that is becoming a wonderful conduit, because the numbers are also extrapolated, and we know how many unique visits and hits a song or an artist has, and that's very, very helpful to our communication. So there's a number of ways to build it to the attention level for us and for everyone else. A performance, I remember one day, someone called me downstairs one day last summer and said, "You got to come down here." And I was in a meeting and I couldn't go down. They said, no, you have to come down here. So I ran downstairs to the parking lot, and I looked up, and there was about 80 or 100 of our staff. And there was a band, 4-piece band, playing on a crane, and the crane was about 70 feet above us, and the crane that held it must have been, had an arm width of maybe 100 feet or something, because this band was way up in the sky, and this was their way of getting our attention. And it was like the Beatles on the roof, and Let It Be. By the time they were in the third song, we had 200 people out in the parking lot watching this band. Now, they obviously had the resources to invest to get our attention, and I'm not suggesting that that's the way to get our attention every week, because I'd be outside in the parking lot all day. But having said that, it was a very unique approach, So anything that's different, anything that's interesting, and also modest, you don't have to be, pulling up in BMWs here. Something that is very, very, very hooky. We've had people come in the office, and again, I'm not suggesting it, with an acoustic guitar and play outside our lobby. And, we've loved some of them and actually done deals with some of them. So, through one of our various companies, you see. So there's a lot of fun ways to do it, but one way not to do it is to just, throw a dart and cross your fingers and hope and pray. Mm-hmm. It's all about will. It's all about, as you know in life, anything that you want, it's evident that you want. And I say that to an artist as well. I think the most attractive part of an artist signing with a major in any country, but I'll speak to Canada for this moment, is the fact that we are a gateway to other territories. That there is a much higher historical ratio of success when you are actually signed to a major, because my counterparts at Universal countries in England and in France, and we have relationships there that are personal and that are brotherhood. So therefore, the access to those territories is exponentially clearer and exponentially better. So, and I don't say that with any disrespect, because the independent sector also has access to other independents, primarily in many of these territories. But if you look at the success ratio of bands, respectfully, many of them have been on major companies, and part of that is the fact that we can tap and get priority in the other territories to break these bands. So I think it's a huge part of the attraction. Another part of the attraction is resources. And again, with respect, because we have so many independents, we obviously assist where we can in resource-wise, but we can help a band who has lofty ambitions to really go big. They can have a better chance with us because we can put the marketing and A&R and video cost resources into them in very significant dollars, and as you know, we do all the time. So that's a biggie also, I think, in terms of attracting an artist. The other thing that's a fallacy I'd like to talk about, and that is that major record companies can get a bad rap in the artist community because they seem to be, publicly traded and managing quarters and all the things that we read about major companies. Well, I started, when I was 8 years old, making my own top 30 charts and taking guitar and piano lessons, and I've been a musician all my life, and I absolutely can look you in the eye and say, I live for and love music. And I'm not unique. People that run or are in senior in major record companies all got in this for the love of music. And somewhere along the way, someone somewhere forgot to be reminded that people like myself absolutely adore music and love artists and artistry. And yeah, the fact that there is a business to run is relevant and salient to that, but it's still a primary love that drives me and drives many, many of my associates with Universal and with other major companies around the world. So I think that's sort of a bubble I want to burst a little bit, because we're getting a bit of a bad rap in terms of, well, they're not really music guys, they're really business guys. Well, everybody is a business guy to some extent, whether you're running an independent in your basement or running Universal. There has to be some semblance of balance and accountability. But by no second does it lessen my passion and everyone in this building's passion for the love of music. We are very active in licensing repertoire because, again, we think that there's a benefit to making sure that we are fully engaged with respect to promotion, marketing, and publicity, etc. So, yes, we've announced 4 license deals with 4 Canadian artists, in the last month, for example. And very well-known artists as well. Tom Cochrane, Carolyn Dawn Johnson in country, George Canyon in country, and the Swollen Members. All very, disparate artists, but all licensed deals where the artists were making their records and, we've come in and been part of the process. We also distribute in Canada and represent New West, which is an LA-based label, TVT, which is a New York-based label, Roadrunner, which is New York and European-based, Metal Blade, Ironworks. So we represent quite a number of U.S. companies in Canada also. Because again, we're here to do the job, and we have the manpower and most importantly, the ambition to be successful on behalf of these labels. So we're very, very pro-licensed deal, worldwide, but certainly in Canada also. The fact that the Canadian music industry has assistance and programs, governmental programs from Heritage Canada, such as Factor and Star Maker, which is a fund that is generated by radio stations as they open new stations across the country, is really the ultimate startup help, not only to get a label to, buy the computers and start the office and build the staff, knowing that subsidy is going to be there for their artists. It allows them to build infrastructure, very important. And also, I see this as greatly beneficial because they're discovering artists that maybe otherwise wouldn't get found. The fact that Factor gave Nickelback their first dollar, which is a true story, and Broken Social Scene, and I believe, I could be incorrect, but I actually think Sarah McLachlan also. So there's Factor will tell you that there's a myriad of success stories that they touched along the way. Were those artists destined to be big artists anyway? Well, maybe, but when you're in a 10-90 ratio business, every little bit helps. So I'm very pro the fact that our government is engaged enough and invested enough in Canada to be nurturing our cultural industries. And the fact that we're a company that operates around the world and we're not subsidized, that's fair. That's fair. There's nothing, it's a fair process. And I think it's great that the indies are being nurtured. With respect to Star Maker, which is the radio-based fund, it's also very good because Star Maker, actually, we can participate in as major companies. The independent sector receives about 71% of the money and us 29%. But Star Maker is just what it says. Star Maker is a fund designed to make stars. So they do what they call a matching fund, for example. So let's say we signed Molly Johnson and we're going out to market and we have a $100,000 marketing plan. So we would give Star Maker a marketing plan as a subsidy. The same way Factor would receive a marketing plan, by the way. And in the case of Factor, the independent would get the $100,000 and they'd help build that story for that artist. In the case of Star Maker, it's a matching fund. So we would put up $100,000 and they would match that with another $100,000. Or if you're an independent in Star Maker, it's a 2-for-1 match. So let's say an independent comes up with $50,000 for a marketing plan. On a 2-to-1 ratio basis, Star Maker will give them an additional $100,000. So suddenly your $50,000 to do a really great marketing plan for your new artist is now $150,000. Now that's a real proposition. So these are positive funds, and we're very much in support of them. Because when you have a Canadian content regulation at your radio stations that's in the area of 35 to 40% of all airplay in this country, we better have a system to support it. If we're going to have that, then, because you can appreciate the majors can't sign every artist that walks the earth. And the independent sector is also very, very active. But that's a very big mandate to fill. So I think between the government subsidies and the fact that, subsidies is the wrong word, government assistance, and the fact that radio is sort of having Canadian content regulations, this builds a star system. This gives us an opportunity to find, nurture, and develop stars. Because we all know, Bedouin Soundclash is a great example, There's a fantastic reggae band on Stomp, which is an independent label here. And, no one was playing the record and no one was touching it. It's just an incredible album. And that album is now becoming platinum. And, Factor helped them out. And then the song finally got a toehold on some commercial for some department store chain, and it was extrapolated, and then a success happened. So there's 100 stories in the Naked City. There's always an interesting one event that's the catalyst to flip it up into the positive. You know something? I think we are savvy. We have the number one computer penetration in the world. We also have the number one piracy issue virtually in the world. And I'll talk about that. One of the reasons that Canada has such an exponential piracy issue on downloads here is the fact that we, WIPO, which is a copyright law that is applicable to, I think, 62 countries around the world, is not yet applicable in Canada. And because of that, there's a bit of a flaw inside of the law here, and I'll use the word flaw, whereby uploading is actually legal technically in Canada. So our consumers are not yet fully embracing, because when the courts have said, go into the store and steal the candy bar and it's okay, you're going to go into the store and maybe think about it. So we haven't really enacted enough laws here to be able to have a digital business model that's at pace with the United States and with Europe. But to your question, and the question is that, are we using Myspace and various other servers, and has there been anything entrepreneurial? There hasn't really been anything entrepreneurial locally in Canada yet, so Myspace is very, very active here. Music videos are a critical part of our marketing plan in Canada, proportionally more so than in the United States. One of the reasons is that Much Music has really become, in their 20-plus years, a top 40 radio station for us, a visual top 40 radio station. So by marketing to a top 40 radio station, which, as you know, ultimately sells the most records, Much Music is a very, very beneficial partner. We also in Canada can make professional-looking, world-class videos fairly inexpensively. The cost of a video here is somewhere between $70,000 and $120,000 Canadian. So they're not, we don't have grandiose budgets of $200,000 and $300,000 US for a video, simply because we have to recognize the size of our country. So we've become efficient at making music videos for a fairly modest price because it's so important. MTV has just opened in Canada nationally, and they are really selling music as a culture and all around music in terms of a talk format, more than they're actually airing videos in the way that Much Music does. But it's still a very positive addition to music as a culture, to the dialogue about music, to turning on new music. And our artists go to Much Music when they're in town. I took my kids on Saturday to Much Music, and in 1 hour, they saw All American Rejects and Fall Out Boy. Much Music and MTV are the stops in town for artists, because of the visual medium. And we're very fortunate to have these, and we recognize that, because, as you say, MTV in the U.S. plays less and less videos. So it's a big part of our proposition and a big part of an artist's success. The other thing that's very appropriate is that it's about a part of a commitment. If you don't really make a video for an artist, it's implicit that maybe that artist isn't a top priority either. So making a video is a little bit part of your sort of making the record too. Because I'll tell you, if there's an artist that's in the non-adult. In the adult genre, it's different. But if there's a rock artist that we've signed and we're not making a video for it, that might be a sign of something. The weighting of radio in Canada is different from that of the United States. We don't have as much hot AC, for example. We have way less urban radio, for example. We have a little bit less top 40 radio, which is why Much Music has become a surrogate top 40 radio station visually for us. Its relative importance to the purchase of music by consumers is like it is in the United States. There's no question it's one of the many driving vehicles to buying music. I think that's changing. I think satellite radio, now that it's here, concurrent with the U.S., both XM and Sirius, is also very, very positive for us. I think, the fact that you can actually see what you heard, because that was a big hassle for us, and I've complained about it quite vocally here, is radio playing 5 or 6 songs at once and none of us knowing what the heck those songs are, so therefore no purchase connection and no association to the artist. So that problem is being rectified with satellite, and I think that's a very positive thing and will help us ultimately. Whether it's a buy button or a physical CD, at least there's a connect there. I was working my way through high school and early university working at record stores. And it was $1.75 an hour. I remember it clearly. I make $2 now. And I'm just kidding. So, it was very much about the love. And, the funny part is I was working at record stores in grade 9, and I spent every bloody dime I made buying records. So I really, my parents were saying, would you like to maybe, you're going to buy a car at some point? I didn't have everything saved. So I felt it was my destiny from when I made those charts at 8 years old and took up the guitar at 9 years old and felt like this is something I need to do. And it's never changed. And I'm in my, late 40s now, and I feel exactly the same. And I still am as excited as when I was 16 about hearing a new song and turning other people onto it. When I was 18, I was the guy who had all my buddies over to my basement with a case of beer, and I made them all shut up and listen to the new Lamb Lies Down on Broadway album by Genesis, and if they talked, I'd berate them because it was so important to me that they could hear what I was hearing. And that stays with you in life. That stays with you if you choose to do this for a business, because that same joy, I now go home to my wife and to my 4 kids with the same excitement. I make my kids listen to a new Nelly Furtado song that I think they're going to like. And when the kids talk, I go, shh, talk after the song. So I think to love it is the key. And to still love it 30 years later there's only one word for it, and that's a blessing. It's a blessing. I joined this company in the mailroom, and it was called MCA at that time. And every time, ironically, and there's a lot of sort of fatalistic in this comment, but every time I either had a job offer or I went to go to another company, something happened. I remember in 1983, I was going to go work for another label because they offered me a job, and we picked up Chrysalis for Canada, and Chrysalis became piping hot. And in 1985, I was interested. There was an opportunity, and we picked up Island Records, just as U2 and Marley and everything was happening. So it's very interesting. As I grew and evolved in my career and in my knowledge and in my thirst for knowledge, which is key, we made additions. As the 80s came and I had another opportunity, we bought Geffen, which at that time was smoking hot with Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith and all this. So organically, this company has grown, and I've for a whole bunch of fatalistic reasons, gone to leave in terms of opportunities a couple of times, and something has attracted me, or someone has attracted me to stay, and this is where I've spent my life, and this is where I've spent my career, and I love this company because I've been in it all my life. My day-to-day here at the office, I do all of my music listening at home, on my iPod, to and from the office, because I need to concentrate. And here at the office during the day is not the time to do that. I always joke with my wife that I'm a little bit like a stockbroker on the floor. I've got 3 things in the air and 3 other people that are trying to get to me. So it's chaotic, and I thrive and love that as a businessman. I guess in the average day, I would talk to somewhere between 6 and 10 artist managers. I would probably talk between 4 and 5 artists directly. I would most certainly deal with a number of lawyers in the course of a day, and contracts or addendums we're doing and things like that. We have a number of meetings internally. Our vice presidents that report to me, I meet with them, I touch them at some point during the day, even if it's for 5 minutes on a very quick debriefing. So during the course of the day, I don't do anything that's longer than about 8 minutes in one thing. I don't sit in 2-hour meetings. I don't have 2-hour meetings. So my day is a series of sort of 5, 8, and 12-minute intervals. This is the longest I've sat down in quite a few weeks. No, but for good reason. But so there's just a myriad of people to deal with, and it's very stimulating and exciting for that reason. It's really a tie between talent and will. I have seen gifted artists that are lethargic with respect to, if their audience is 46 people, they're happy. And there's a place and a great respect for that. So that's an artist with all talent and no will, in my view. So I think the combination, and I don't mean blind ambition when I say will. I mean will to find out, okay, I want to have this experience. I want to see where this is going to take me. I want to be open to change. I want to be open to interpretation and input and all those things that go with succeeding. So I really do think it's an even split. You know, if the core gift is not there, all the will in the world can't do a thing. You know, and that's the frustrating part of our job is, you know, I meet human beings that are artists that I absolutely, as people, adore. And it tears my heart out sometimes if, for example, we don't end up doing something together with them. That's why it's so important that the gift or the talent is there along with the will. I think the first thing, if you want to succeed in the business of music, is to be authentic. If you don't really feel it, and if it looks like a business where people make lots of money and have fancy cars and big houses and that's your reason, it's not the right one. So to get from the mailroom to the CEO's chair, it's a combination of business acumen and empathy. If you don't have, you're dealing in a commodity that's not a commodity. You're actually selling and marketing something and nurturing something that's an intellectual property and a person's mind and a person's persona. It's not a bottle of Evian. It's not a widget. So empathy is extremely important in music, in the business of music, to have for human beings, any human being, but particularly for artists who are fascinating and fun people to deal with. So will is back again as a word. Empathy is very clear, and an authentic love for the music. And the thing I'll close with on that answer in terms of how do you get my job and how do you go after this is to have an end zone in mind. When I was in the mailroom when I was 20 years old, I didn't say, I want to be CEO by the time I'm 40. I didn't do that. I said, I want to be the CEO of this company and I want to run it because I love it when I'm ready to. And if someone handed me that at 35, I wouldn't have had the maturity or the wisdom, and I wouldn't have been ready, and I probably would have screwed it up. But it's so interesting that I never set a time limit, and I was actually 40 the year it happened. So things happen in their place and time but always, I think you always have to keep the end zone in mind. You know, along the way, chapters will happen, you know, but I think always keep one eye on the ball. I am so happy I'm making a career in music because I'm in touch with the fact that I wasn't good enough as a musician to be a rock star. So can I touch, feel, and be connected with music in my life every day? Can I bring the gift of that to my 4 kids and to my wife and my gift of enthusiasm and love for this? And is it important to me that they see that in their father? Unbelievably so. I mean, how blessed is that?